Everybody. Today we have Zaylore Stout of Zaylore Stout and Associates LLC. He is a employment law attorney, an HR consultant, speaker, and author of Our Gay History in 50 States. Today he's talking about creating an inclusive workspace, and this is something, it's a topic that's very relevant, especially in today's climate. So I'll just let Zaylor take it away. If anybody has any questions, leave your questions in the chat. Unless Zaylor asks you to unmute your mic, I'd like everybody to mute your mic while he's speaking. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Zaylor. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Lori, for the invitation on co-working month. I'm excited that I've been a member of Office Center since 2012, if my memory serves me correct. So right out of law school. Some of my background, just so you know, I served as an outsourced HR consultant to roughly 350 companies prior to going to law school. So I knew that I would be focusing on the labor and employment aspect of the business. And today I have Rebecca Wagner, who's also going to be my teammate in regards to this. Rebecca is the Executive Director for Quorum, which is the LGBTQ plus and Allied Chamber of Commerce here in the Twin Cities. We do presentations all the time. We're actually supposed to have done a presentation at the Kentucky Derby Diversity Summit. But the Derby got pushed back because of COVID, and then now everything's just kind of going to be virtual. So, but we're always we love talking about this stuff, and not stuff that's specifically LGBT focused. Though I'm actually a board member of Quorum as well, so technically I'm one of Rebecca's bosses. But Rebecca, she's amazing. She knows exactly what she's doing. She doesn't need us. So let me get the screen sharing going in regard to this so that we can get to the discussion.
And by the way, you're never allowed to select my picture again.
No? What? You don't like the photo? Come on.
Oh.
All right. So,
well, yours is great, Z.
Oh, well, where did this one come from? Oh, this was the Lavender magazine. Yes.
Yes,
so
yeah. You guys, that was a totally great shot.
I love
Rebecca,
this one.
I like it. Actually, the hair's even better now.
And everything.
Yeah, this picture was taken at one of our events right as the event was starting, and I was panicking, and the photographer wanted me to take this picture, and so I'm like, hurry up with my eyes. So
there you go.
All right, so what I came up with Rebecca is we have like 10 quick tips, and the important thing to know in regards to these tips is it's interesting because diversity, equity, and inclusion has become this whole thing in and of itself. I know when I was in college back in the 90s, HR was barely, a degree that you could get. And now there's this separate carve out in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm an attorney. My experience in regards to HR, I'm not a DEI expert, but a lot of the work that I've been doing and a lot of the work Rebecca does, still revolves around this area. We both presented at the Forum on Workplace Inclusion on multiple occasions, and that's the world's largest diversity and inclusion conference that happens in the world, happens right here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so one of the first things, especially when you're talking to C-suite folks or owners of companies, you always got to get down to, what's the return on investment, right? How does this hit my bottom line? How does this help me in regards to what's the business case in regards to, diversity? So this is one that I'm going to throw to Rebecca, and then I'll chime in and add some extra there because I know that Rebecca's done a gazillion of these types of presentations, all over the place from police departments, all the way up to C-suite individuals and, even with the Minnesota Twins. So go ahead, Rebecca, jump on in.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me today. This is I'm super excited about this, and I love presenting with Zaylor. This is a very, very fun. And the ROI question is the question that I get absolutely number one, the most often asked question. What is the ROI for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And, and I want you to sort of take it out of a cost. I think that ROI, when we think about DE&I work, we should really be thinking about it as a profit center, not rather than a cost center. And what I mean by that is when you have a diverse workforce, you end up with a diverse a diverse thought chain, you end up with better products. And like McKinsey has a whole bunch of studies about this. This is a really well-researched area. But more importantly, in your company, you are going to be able to retain talent. We live in a world now that is very different than the world that Z and I grew up in, and that I suspect that most of us grew up in, where we would go to a company and in essence we would beg them to hire us, and then we would not come out at work, and we would not make any waves, no matter how diverse we were, because we wanted to keep that job. And now the job market is very, very different. People are coming out of college and out of other workplaces, and they're looking for diversity. They're looking to see if you have an employee resource group. They're looking to see what your diversity and inclusion plan is as a company. And if you don't have one, then your company is not going to be in the top 5 or maybe even in the top 10 of a job searcher, for a job searcher. One of the other things I want you to think about is, how much does it cost to train an employee in a year? So you think about, let's say, I'm pick a round number, $100,000. That's their salary. It takes them a year to get trained. And if they don't feel like there are other people like them in that company, if they don't see themselves reflected across every level, across the C-suite, across management, across any sort of planning, then they're going to leave, and your company has just lost $100,000, and you have to start the recruitment process all over again. It's really clear that when you have diverse work teams, you have better products, you have better thought, you have better, if you are a consultant. So one of our members, for example, is Deloitte Consulting, and this is something that they rely on heavily. They want their front-facing, their forward-facing, public-facing people to match their customers and to be similar to their customers, because what that does is then that builds trust in your company. And then and there's other things that's good for your brand, to be considered an open and inclusive company across the board, not just for LGBT folks, but when you think about women, you think about people of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. You think about you think about the economic opportunity piece as well. So Z, jump in with some ideas, and I can.
Yeah, I love that you stopped right there with the economic opportunities, because then that's where I was going to actually jump right in regards to that. One of the interesting things to know is, this supplier diversity concept has really taken off, not only with Fortune 500 companies, but also from a municipal perspective. So, for example, the state of Minnesota has its supplier diversity goal that they want to spend at least 15% of their overall spending for the state of Minnesota on diverse firms. So that's minority firms owned by minorities, either they be women, racial minorities. Rebecca and I are actually working on expanding that group and that scope to include LGBT organizations, businesses that are certified through the NGLCC, which is the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. Also, with veterans, currently there isn't, the veterans aren't included in the supplier diversity chain here for municipal contracts. So that's another area that we're working with our colleagues on, as well as individuals with disabilities. There's many out there that have disabilities that own businesses that could take advantage of some of these opportunities in regards to this, diversifying of the supply chain. So that's important to know, that there are specific opportunities out there for some of these diverse firms, and that there are companies, larger companies, and the interesting thing with the larger companies is then they look at their tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers in regards to what is it that they're doing to ensure that they either have a diverse workforce, or that they're also partnering with and subcontracting potentially out the work to diverse individuals. So I know last year I did some training for some of the local construction companies, and that's a big, huge thing for them. I mean, Minnesota spends a lot of money on construction, and there are specific goals in regards to, making sure that either the organization is diverse or it's a diverse firm. Or they're subcontracting some of the work out to diverse firms to be able to hopefully, rising tide lifts all boats aspect. the other thing is, you think about some of these organizations like, I'm sure many of you have heard of the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, right? And it's companies touting in regards to them having 100% in regards to this and that. Consumers are way more savvy these days, and they're really expecting for these organizations to be as diverse as America is. And so, we can go on and on. It's in a whole hour in regards to just the business case in regards to it. But just wanted to provide you with some high level insight in regards to these aspects and areas, as well as, having a diverse team looking at things. I'm sure we've seen some of the some of the marketing and development faux pas that certain companies have had in regard to certain things. You can look at it and know they definitely did not have a woman on that development team. Otherwise, that never would have happened, or they never would have had a person of color, or they clearly didn't have anybody that's LGBT that's, that was in that whole, decision-making process in regards to some of these decisions being made. So as Rebecca said, you get better quality product, as well as, employees are looking for different things, right? And this is one of the generational differences as well. They're not just getting a job just to get a job, right? They want a job where they can feel like they're contributing, that they can make a difference, that there's some type of impact that's being made. And, it's prior to COVID, it was really hard to get employees, right? It's really, it's tough labor market from that perspective. So all kinds of things to think about from that perspective, recruiting and everything.
And I would just add, when you create a space for someone to bring their full and authentic self to work, then that person is going to stay with your company and grow and thrive with your company. And the other one thing I'll say about supplier diversity is that it's not just for corporations. We're working with large companies. We're working with large nonprofits. Anybody who buys things can have a supply chain and can diversify that supply chain. And, and if you have a need, there's a diverse business that can meet that need. So just wanted to put that in there.
Absolutely. One of the reasons why Office with Office Centers, see, women-owned business. All right. Number 2, right? Don't make assumptions. So I'm not sure if you've heard of this book. I remember a friend recommended it to me a long time ago, and I've read it multiple times. The 4 Agreements, right? By Don Miguel Ruiz. And I wanted to make sure that I highlighted one of his, let me let Caesar in. The 3rd agreement out of the 4 agreements is as follows. It says, don't make assumptions. We have a tendency to make assumptions about everything. The problem with making assumptions is that we believe they are true. We could swear that they're real. We make assumptions about what others are thinking and doing, and then we take it personal, and then we blame them if they react in a way that lets us know that our assumptions are incorrect. So the tough part here in regards to assumptions is, we all do it. We see somebody, we meet somebody, we size them up. You may hear that Rebecca's from Alabama. No, Alabama, Arkansas. I always say the wrong A state. Arkansas.
The other.
There's a big difference. That Rebecca's from Arkansas or that I'm from California, there'll be these assumptions that'll come along with that, right? Or that I'm Black, or that Rebecca's a woman. There's assumptions that come along with all those different types of things, and not allowing people to be, to be able to make their own mark based on their own interactions with you. And so it's important not to make assumptions, and that's a tough thing to do. But we want to make sure that we're fighting those types of things. I do a lot of workplace investigations, and it's some of the assumptions that come up, especially with assumptions relating to race and ethnicity, a lot of times sadly end up coming up in regards to some of my investigative work. So you'll have somebody that'll assume that somebody is Puerto Rican when they're from El Salvador, and then that can put a bad taste in somebody's mouth, especially if it's coming from somebody in a position of leadership within the organization. What do you have to add in regard to this part, Rebecca?
No, I have just a little bit. If it was a longer training, then I would move you through an exercise where we would talk about the assumptions that people make about me. So I would, and it's one of the only times where I'm like, so people look at me and they assume that I am a straight white soccer mom from, I don't know, St. Louis Park or Wayzata or something like that I drive a minivan. And when in reality, none of those things are true. And so I will walk into a room and I'll say, well, how much free stuff did you just give me? Because I look like you. I look like the people in the room. And so when we use assumptions, we're not just taking away from people, you're also making assumptions and giving people free stuff. So my voice suddenly matters more. And in fact, when I got hired at Quorum, a person that I knew really well said, "It's so sweet that they're hiring an ally to lead this LGBT organization." And I said, "Well, my wife doesn't think I'm an ally." Um, you know, but it's also, it also gives me a really interesting point to start a conversation with about assumptions, because in my case, people generally make positive assumptions and they want to give me extra stuff. So I, and so keep that in mind when you're thinking about assumptions, that it's not just negative. Sometimes we're giving people the benefit of the doubt. We're saying, "Oh, of course she's like me," when we might not be. And so just keep that in mind, that it's, that with as we move through the world, it's not just negative. Sometimes it's free stuff that I didn't earn.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, that's the stuff that can create tension in the workplace, right?
Yep.
You have two employees that are hired at the exact same time. One's male, one's female. They say one black, one's white, one's Muslim, one's Christian, however you want to slice it up. And, again, some of that, free stuff that comes out in regards to the assumptions is provided to one as opposed to the other. Then the question is how is that creating a more equitable and inclusive workspace? What type of environment is the employee that's not getting that free stuff thinking? And people pay attention. People pay attention to all these little subtle differences. Who do you say hello to when you come into work, and who don't you say hello to when you come into work? And is there a certain group of individuals that end up making up the individuals that you don't say hello to? Sadly, sometimes that's the baseline stuff that ends up resulting in there being hostile work environment type claims in the workplace. Is things just as simple as that, just those little teeny tiny things that occur in the workplace culminate into, sometimes more egregious type of situations, and they're able to paint this picture from day one, them starting with the organization, and something as simple as somebody not greeting them when they come into work.
Right.
All right, development and training. So there's always the unconscious bias training, which I recommend, especially with today, in today's day and age. But there's all kinds of training that needs to happen. And with my background in regards to HR, the main thing that I see is that organizations don't invest in their people and their members of management. So the example that I will give, you'll have somebody that's amazing and great in sales. They're the top salesperson, bar none. They kick everybody's butt in regards to sales. And so then an opening comes up for somebody to be the sales manager, and they immediately put that person into that position. But what they fail to do is train that person in regards to how to manage people, because it's different to be able to make sales to a third party, to the customer, and different to be able to manage people to be able to do the same thing. And to know that that's a different skill set that individuals need to have in order to be successful. And so I just seen more times than I can count in my 20 years doing this work where managers aren't set up for success in regards to situations like that. And so it's the same thing in regards to the concept of bias in the workplace, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias, because the issue is that it comes down to, you don't have to leave that far outside of the Twin Cities in order to be able to be in an environment or in a community where there aren't that many people that are that different, right? I remember when I was running for office, I met a local official, and they said, yeah, they met their first Black person when they went to college. So they were able to go their whole life and not ever have met a Black person until I went to college. And so the question is how does that impact their ability to be able to do their job if now they're responsible for either supervising people of color or being supervised by somebody of color? And there's all these assumptions that came along with their lives up to that point. And then there's no work in regards to unpacking that. So I'll hand it over to Rebecca, and then I'll take a look at this question that just jumped in for us.
I think unconscious bias is a huge thing, and I can't stress that enough. It's different than other forms of bias because we don't recognize that it's happening, and it comes from a place of privilege. It comes from our relationships with power. It comes from sort of how we move through the world in general. And when I talk a lot about hiring, and unconscious bias really plays out in hiring. I was part of the St. Paul Police Department's community hiring team a few years ago, probably about 5 years ago. And so basically what we were doing was we were doing the first round of elimination. So so all these people were applying, and it was like, 800 people that were applying for these like 100 spots. And so we needed to eliminate. And so what they do is they pair a police officer with a community member. The first thing that they teach you that we spent an entire day training on was unconscious bias, because it creeps in so quickly. And I'll, one of the other things that I hear about hiring is, well, of course I would hire diversity if all things were equal. And so when I hear that statement, that tells me that whoever is doing that hiring hasn't done some of that deep dive into figuring out their own biases, because they haven't had the training and development to do that. And then when we have those kinds of roadblocks in hiring, then you're not going to get a diverse company. You're not going to get a diverse team, because the other example is Apple. So they used to have the most diverse team of people in the entire universe. And about 15 years ago, they started hiring for MBAs versus hiring for experience. And suddenly they looked around and said, wait a minute, we no longer have the same level of diversity. And there's a lot of reasons about access to education and all of those kinds of things. But that unconscious bias really impacts hiring, but very often it's a function of training and development. People are just given this job, and can you imagine being on a crisis line and not being trained to deal with crime victims, right? But that's what we're doing with managers that we're not training.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's a human instinct to gravitate towards the folks that are like you, right? And so the people that you end up mentoring at your job end up being the people that are more like you, as opposed to the ones that are not. And so, setting in these structures where it's a structured mentor situation and program, leaves it, takes it out of the, subjective for individuals to identify their own, and then forces and makes those types of situations work. Same thing in regards to women, right? In the legal profession, legal profession is notorious for having, not very many diverse people as you move up the food chain from associate to partner, from partner to, owner, and from judges and everything. The higher up you go up the food chain, the fewer women you see, the fewer people of color, the fewer diverse individuals. And so again, it's setting up those strategic situations and programs to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to be mentored and to be put in a situation where they can move forward and develop and succeed. I think we have a question in regard to this. I'll let you jump on the pronouns, Rebecca, so I'll take a look at this other question that came in.
Okay, so when most of us were raised, we were raised with he and she, right? That was it. Those are how people identify. You'll see a lot of people, including a lot of our corporate partners, myself included. We now have our pronouns, and Z has it in his name, and I usually change mine too. One of the biggest places that we make assumptions is around pronouns. We look at someone and we assume gender. We assume that because they present a certain way, that I'm a she and Zaylor is a he. That might not necessarily be the case. The other thing is that we now live in a world where we are. Okay, I don't know what just happened. Oh, there it is. Sometimes my phone, it's crazy. Anyway, the range of pronouns has also changed. Z, their, them. There's a whole bunch of people who don't identify, who don't feel like male pronouns, sort of typically male pronouns or historically female pronouns fit them. And so they use they and them. This is the new trend. This is the especially here in the Twin Cities, we have one of the largest transgender populations and gender nonconforming populations in the country. For a variety of reasons. Part of it is the work at the U of M. Part of it is that that large companies are bringing people in from all over the country and in fact all over the world. And so
and Minnesota was the first to provide protections for individuals based on sexual orientation and gender identities. So this is an area where Minnesota was the first, not California, not New York, but Minnesota.
Companies are still struggling with they them pronouns. In Minnesota, you can also get a driver's license with a third gender on it. And I think it's just an X, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is, and that you can't, necessarily do that in all states in the country. In fact, most of them you can't. But that's a way that that Minnesota has said we are firmly behind the range of identities that exist now. We've moved beyond him and her, she and he, to really embrace the larger world around us.
Yeah, the one thing I want to make sure that I add in regards to pronouns is it's so funny because uh, I tend to get junk mail, and then sometimes it's like Miss Zaylore Stout, and I was like, oh, that one's going in the trash. But then even sometimes on emails, it's been a while since somebody felt like they had to gender an email, but I actually just received one this morning, and I'm just like, why did you have to put he or she? Why can't you just put Zaylore? I mean, it's
Dear ma'am.
but it's I know it's unnecessary, but the interesting thing to make sure that I want to make sure that you know is that the now I'm trying to remember the generation number. It's not Generation Z. I guess the millennials. Yeah, millennials. 8% of them identify as either as LGBT. So it's the highest percentage of all of generations identifying as LGBT, and there is a larger percentage of the younger generations that find themselves to classify themselves as being gender nonconforming, and they don't feel like there's necessarily a need for them to identify as male or female. They may be gender fluid or something. And so if especially if you plan on working with some of the younger generations, or your business is focused on appealing to the younger generations, it's definitely something you're going to have to you have to get on the bandwagon in regards to, because it's not something that's changing. It's not something that's a fad.
That ship has sailed. We can no longer not have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, wait, I think there was actually a question. So the question, I think was, how can I train my office center team to be welcoming to all in our workplaces? How do we know if we're doing a good job? It's easy to say that we're welcoming, but reality could be a different fact. So what insight do you have in regards to this, Rebecca?
Part of it is, you can train, you can train and train and train. But how are people interacting? How are people, are you still getting the same kinds of complaints? And not necessarily like full on, I'm going to file a formal complaint, but how does the atmosphere feel? And do people see themselves reflected in your posters, in your welcoming open spaces? Do people see magazines that reflect them? Do people see, in the bathroom, for example? This is the a hilarious story. So I used to work at a domestic violence program, and I would go and train people, domestic violence programs, on how to be more open and inclusive. And I was at this one that shall remain nameless, and they had 2 single stall restrooms in their entryway, and one said male and one said female. And we had gotten kind of to this point of the training, and I said, well, why don't you just pop off the male and female and just put family restroom, or single stall restroom, whatever. And this woman literally raised her hand and said, where will people know where to go to the bathroom? And I said, they're going to pee in your plants. They're not. Right? But what are you doing to, and I find that, I still find that funny. Not everybody finds that funny, but it's one of those little things you can do, where you're making where you're no longer making assumptions. And that affects single stall restrooms, affects more than LGBT folks. It affects people with different gender caregivers. It affects families. It affects people who don't like being in an open, multiple stall restrooms because of size or other things, right? And so it's one of those little things that you can do. And so you look around, and what are you celebrating? If your office has holiday parties, are there other holidays, not just Pride, but are there other holidays that you're celebrating? How do people feel? How do people see themselves reflected in your workplace?
Perfect. Sorry. Yes. Oh, sorry. I was looking at the. We're getting thanks for the presentation already, but no, this is absolutely great in regard to that. But sorry. Moving on to the next one, because Rebecca hit it home. But this one is really important, and this reminds me of quorum actually too. And it's, you know, company events, and it's switching up the times of your company events. If you always have your company events at a particular time, that could create a barrier for individuals who may have childcare issues, or who may you know, have elderly parents that they have to care for, individuals who have second or third jobs, those different types of things. So you always want to try to make sure that you're varying when the events occur, that they don't always occur first thing in the morning, or always right after work, or always on the weekends. You know, if you vary those types of things. So for example, with quorum, I mean, I think we have like 80 events that we do a year. You know, and there always ends up being an event that fits for everybody's schedule. So some people like the lunch and learns, you know, and you'll always see them at the lunch and learns. You won't see them anywhere else. Some people love the networking events where there's some wine and some beer involved, right? You know that, Lori. I know you guys have your happy hours. We love that. You know, then there's folks that love getting up first thing in the morning on Friday morning, the earliest one ever, and being there for those. And so it's mixing it up so you provide an opportunity for everybody to be able to participate. And just know that this is not just something that applies to companies. This is something that applies to municipalities as well. Because I know when I was in St. Louis Park, this was a concern in regards to individuals who are interested in regards to running for office, right? Because then, I mean, if it's a part-time job, but it's really full-time work, how is somebody, you know, who isn't independently wealthy going to be able to do that? And so it's really thinking outside the box in regard to that area. Did you have anything to add on that one, Rebecca?
You know, I think that this is another place where we make assumptions. We assume that people work all day and then want to have an event at night, or we assume that all networking needs to happen in the morning. We don't necessarily know people struggle. And now during this COVID time, it's thrown everything up in the air. You know, parents are now both parenting and working and doing all of these other things from home, and there's a lot less opportunity for people to get out, even in a co-working space. And so yeah, so I think I'm just talking now, but I think it's really crucial to vary times and do all of that.
Absolutely. And I mean, quorum is a great model in regards to that. I think we have more events than in some of the other chambers across the country, but it works. I mean, that's the thing. Like I go to a ton of them, and there's folks you only see at certain stuff. And so I think it's always an awesome thing to really think about and be intentional in regard to that. Another way is to make sure that you involve your employees in regard to the discussion, and not only involving them, but then also actually listening to them. Now, that doesn't mean putting into place everything that the employees want, right? But including them in the process, when at all possible, if at all possible, you know, the sooner the better. Because remember, especially if you're in leadership or management or the owner of the company, you may not be doing the actual work on a 40, 50, 60-hour week basis. They're the ones that are front facing, seeing the clients all the time, and knowing what's best for them and what can elevate that client experience. And so, you know, providing them with that opportunity, you know, Rebecca mentioned earlier, establishing ERGs, which are employee resource groups. Those were really big in the 80s and kind of fell by the wayside, and they're having a big resurgence. And so that's an important thing to think about. You know, other options is create an inclusion council, right? And so that inclusion council can be made up of a dedicated group of 8 to 12 influential leaders within your organization. You know, they're in different levels in regards to management. You have to make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 individuals that are in senior management there, so that there's, some strength and viability in the organization. Different focus groups, you know, those are different ways in order to be able to think about things. And that reminds me, that's what I was going to say in regards to the question on how would we know whether what we're doing, if we're really actually walking the walk in regards to inclusion, is you can do a survey. You can do a survey, you know, you can have, an opportunity for people to fill out comment cards, especially if you have guests that are coming in. It reminds me of when I go to the post office, they always have the little survey, you know, that they circle, and they give you the scan bars to try to make sure you get the surveys in. All kinds of options. Really easy example I want to be able to show you. I don't know if you've heard about the Flaming Hot Cheetos story, but if you haven't, you want to make sure that you look it up, because it's an amazing story in regards to, you know, how Cheetos and Frito-Lay was able to really capitalize on this idea that came from somebody that wasn't anywhere close to working in the development area. So that's my homework for you, is to look up the Flaming Hot Cheeto story, and you'll find out how listening to employees can actually improve your bottom line if you're willing to open your ears, mind, and heart to them. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, I was just going to
I was
say.
going to say, did you see that Flaming Hot Cheetos is now going to be macaroni and cheese?
Yes. they're using the Flaming Hot Cheetos for everything.
And I was just going to follow up with what Zaylore was saying. So anonymous feedback surveys, you can do these through SurveyMonkey. 5 questions, and start with it. That allows you to really start with a baseline, and that really allows you to start with a good baseline and then move from there. But you need to do them frequently. So we do not employee surveys. We do member surveys once a year to get feedback and to figure out where we're going and where those ideas are coming from. Because sometimes people are nervous about presenting an idea, especially if they're a marginalized employee. And then they're not going to necessarily want to be the person that says, here, I'm going to raise my hand and give you this idea that you might laugh at, right? So what are more than one way to involve employees, and surveys are a really easy one of them.
Surveys are really easy, absolutely. And I love that it provides, there are those extroverts and introverts, and it provides an opportunity for however it is that they identify, to be able to provide that information and feedback in the way that best suits them. This is some really cool artwork, and it's a quote by Audre Lorde. It says, "It is not our differences that divide us; it is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." And so this one is, the focus is really in regards to celebrating employee differences. For office centers, it could be celebrating, client differences and all those different types of things. And that's regardless of whether it's, cultural, religious, different abilities, different folks. Sometimes they have potlucks in regards to things and that, today's 100-year anniversary of women, getting the right to vote, right? And so it's identifying, different situations that you can post on your social media accounts or things to be able to show that you're paying attention. Right? You're not just paying attention in regards to any of the particular categories that you personally identify with, but you're looking out to serving as an ally to others as well. And so it's taking that extra step, to do that extra looking and that extra search to be able to find ways to be able to celebrate the differences. So again, if it's, Ramadan's happening, or being intentional when you're scheduling meetings, to look and see if there's any Jewish holidays. I mean, there's lots of areas where we really have to really be intentional in regard to this stuff. And yes, sometimes it can get complicated, right? And you're like, oh, why do there have to be so many holidays? But these are important celebrations for different people and different parts of our community, and so it's showing that dignity and respect in regards to that. Rebecca, did you have anything to add on this one?
I also think this begins to address that concept of, I don't see race, or I don't see color, or I don't see gender, because when you say that, you're actually not, you're doing the exact opposite of celebrating the differences and recognizing the uniqueness of each employee. And so, and it can be as simple as the first Sunday night of the month. You take an hour, you Google all the celebrations that are going to happen that month, and then you stack up some articles and you schedule them to go out once a week. It can literally be that simple, right? It doesn't have to be a gigantic deep dive into everything in your life.
You don't need to be the expert.
What you do need to do is say, I'm paying attention, I'm aware, and we're aware. And if I don't know what Ramadan is, I'm going to look it up and Google it, because guess what? This thing right here that keeps ringing, because I'm so sorry, it's ringing through my laptop, so that's why it keeps disturbing you. Has more power than it took to put a rocket on the moon, right? So I think we can Google Ramadan and figure that out. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. All right. And yes, it starts with you. So This important part is, making sure that inclusion is everybody's responsibility, right? There's certain organizations that are like, we have an inclusion task force and they're the ones that are responsible for inclusion and nobody else is. No, it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that everybody feels welcome there. I know that when I walk into any office center anywhere, I'm always greeted with a great smile, and I've been to so many of them. I a lot of times know the people that are there, which is always amazing and great too, right? But then, the question is, how do my guests feel when they show up, right? Are they greeted with a smile the same way that I'm greeted with? And all of those things are really important, especially because, that's the forward facing, prospect and aspect of my business. And people don't have a warm and fuzzy interaction, then that could negatively impact and be detrimental to my bottom line. And so those are things to think about. I know that I'm choosing Office Center because we're here talking about this. But any business that it is that you have, right? You want to make sure that you can tell when somebody answers the phone with a smile as opposed to doesn't answer the phone with a smile. It's a thing, right? And so it's making sure that the inclusion aspect is everybody's responsibility. And then I'll hold off the last part for the very last slide, which I think is one of the most important ones. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I think that people often don't know how to educate themselves on differences so on people that are different than themselves, right? And we don't ultimately, as human beings, I think we don't want to offend someone. We don't know where to start sometimes with doing research, and so we then go to the person who is most impacted and say, "Teach me," which we shouldn't do at all. We should go to the internet. We should go. Not the scary places on the internet. There's books to read, right? Like, especially, you think about George Floyd's murder and how many conversations about race this is sparking, right? And how we might not have all of the answers, and we don't have all of the answers, but beginning to talk about racism in a way that is very different is on us. And I'm pointing to myself as a white person. It is on me. It is to begin to teach myself and start reading books and begin to make those changes in my own world. Check out my assumptions. Figure out my language changes, for example, and that's a great way for us to build. Language is a huge bridge builder, and if I can educate myself about new current language that's not offensive, then I can begin to have conversations in different ways. So that's the other piece about it. It starts with you.
Absolutely. The last piece is accountability, right? So we can have all these great, we went through the last 9 tips in regard to this, but if people aren't held accountable in regards to actually putting these things into practice, then what's the point, right? Because then you're providing people the opportunity to be able to opt out from it. And so a lot of times, companies have, teamwork in regards to an employee evaluation. There's different areas where you can have include some of this stuff in your, the manager and supervisor type evaluations as well. So it's holding managers accountable. So there's, that 10% bonus that's attributable to this particular aspect of inclusion. And it's not just a box that you check, it's a culture that's developed from within your organization. And so, the accountability aspect is really important, because otherwise, you just provide people the opportunity to be able to choose to do it or opt out and not really have to worry about it. And it's really not going to impact their bottom line. Whereas if you make it part of the evaluation review process, where there's questions relating to these types of things, whether you have trainings and they attend those trainings, all those types of things are going to be helpful in regards to that. Rebecca?
I would just say that this is a great opportunity to live your values. So if you have a code of conduct for your members and guests, or for the people who are auditing there and their guests, then make sure that is not just a piece of paper. Post it places. Have it in those little plastic pop-up things, like that we do. We're putting our code of conduct on our website, so that there's nobody will ever again be able to say, well, I didn't know that I couldn't do X, Y, and Z and say racist things or hurtful things or anything like that, because I can just point them to the website and say, look, you sign this when you become a member. But it's that creating opportunities for people to not have the opportunity to opt out. So in your work plan, or in your business planning, how are you creating opportunities for diversity, equity, and inclusion in your with your employees? I mean, do you have, like, is it just as important as sales? And I argue that it is. If you have a sales goal, then you'll also have I will attend X amount of trainings, or I will read X amount of books, whatever it is. Like, figure it out for yourself, because it's not like a one-stop shop, or one size fits all. But there are ways to create that accountability. And the other thing that I'll say before I'm done is, as I'm like talking forever, is
No, you're fine.
we live in a cancel culture right now, and I talk about a cancel culture all the time, and that's people are afraid to make mistakes, especially around DE&I work, because they're afraid to get canceled out. We see people getting canceled out all the time. Their voices no longer matter. And so my other piece about accountability is, how do you create a culture to call people in, because people learn by being called in to have a conversation. I can give you a very specific example. Once again, after George Floyd, I spent hours and hours and hours and hours talking to our members, talking them through some of the unique aspects of, the riots and the social uprising and all of that, and why they were happening. And it would have been very easy for me to just say, oh my gosh, you are an idiot, right? But that wasn't going to change the discussion, and that wasn't going to advance equity and inclusion. And so, when possible, try to make it a call in.
Absolutely. And I love the concept of being able to make sure. One of the things I think we've lost is like providing grace for people to be able to stumble and figure things out, right? People expect you to be perfect in regards to all of these areas. And, for me, where I grew up in Orange County, California, a mile away from Disneyland, there's not a critical mass of Black people, of Muslims, of Jewish people. And then I moved to Minnesota, and I like have all these Muslim friends, and I was like, oh, what's this Ramadan thing? And I'm like learning about all these different cultures and stuff, which is amazing and great. But if I was expected to have a certain level of proficiency, given the fact that I'm not from here and that wasn't the area where I grew up with, it's difficult, right? So people have to be able to stumble through. And the interesting thing is, I mean, you can really tell when somebody's trying and when somebody's not. And so that's one of the differences where people are talking about, let's say, the pronouns, right? How many times can you make a mistake in regards to somebody's pronouns before it's problematic? LGBT folks still stumble on people's pronouns all the time, right? I have a friend that's on a board. He's transgender, and he's still stumbling over pronouns for other folks that are transgender, gender nonconforming. So I'm giving you grace, folks. I'm giving you grace. Nobody's perfect in regards to that. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Talk about the music and lyrics. It's not just the music. It's not just
the music. It's not just the words that people say, but it's the meaning behind it. So I always say that it's not the words, it's the music. So the example that I give when I do my sexual harassment prevention training is that you can look at somebody and say, oh, you look nice today. What do you think? Socially acceptable compliment? Can I get a thumbs up, thumbs down? What do you think? Socially acceptable? All right. And then what if I was like, you look nice today, right? Oh, Amanda's cracking up, right? Same words, exact same words, right? But the message is in the music, the tone, the inflection, and the nonverbal communication, right? All those different types of things. And so it's the same thing in regards to some of these areas. You can tell when people are really trying and that they're really struggling. I forgot who it is. So I was talking to somebody just yesterday, and they said that they had a friend that just transitioned recently, and they keep saying their wrong name, but they've known them for 20 years, and that it's just going to take a while for their brain to transition over to not to call them by the same name, but at least you're trying, right? And so, it's the same thing in regards to, DEI work and all those different types of things. Because, women needed allies in order to be able to get the right to vote, right? Because unless it was the men that were able to say, we need some equality here. I agree with my mom and my sister and my aunt and my grandmother, right? Same thing in regards to, civil rights. Right? There's not enough Black and brown people in the country to be able to vote equity in, right? We need our allies. We need our white allies to help make that happen. Same thing with the LGBT community. Same thing with immigrants, right? So I think if we all look at it as we're really trying to be allies to each other, right? We're trying to find better ways to be better brothers and sisters and siblings, which is the one that I like using because it's non-gender specific. Sibling could be anybody. Then we can all be in a better place from that perspective. So I want to make sure I provide Rebecca an opportunity for some closing, and then we'll have 5 minutes for questions. Yay, we did great
No,
today.
I think you've hit it on the head. You were talking about the pronouns and the music and the lyrics. I love that analogy, by the way, and I'm totally going to steal it. But when a friend of mine transitioned several years ago, and my job, I went with her up to the UP, and my job for 3 days was to just say her new name. And one of the most hurtful things to her was that her family kept using her dead name, her previous name, and misgendering her. And at first, the first day, you're fine. By day 2, it's deliberate. And so that's, and by day 3, her heart was broken and she didn't talk to her family for almost a year. But so that's the difference between, people can tell that you're working and trying. So.
Well, awesome. We'll open it up to questions for the last 5 minutes. I'm sure you got some. We couldn't have answered everything for you. Welcome, Amy. We were talking about you earlier.
You've made us feel better about some of the things that we do in the office center realm. We try to say that our workspace is inclusive, but people, like some of you talked about with your Chamber of Commerce types of things, they're members and they get to choose whether they belong or whether they want to go to someplace else. So we want to be that inclusive workspace. And a lot of times I think that we are very inclusive and bend over backwards for all of our clients. But then, I get a letter that says, I feel this way, and it's different than what I thought I was creating in our company. And it's different than I would want to even train my staff. And so, how is it that you look and meet these head on, because you don't want somebody to go out and say, my clients weren't treated respectfully. I was not treated with the same type of respect that my neighbor and everything else does. It's been a really hard. We have, close to 1,500 members. And I think that across the board, what I always say is in a lot of co-working spaces, you can have all Gen X, you can have all accountants, you can have all seasoned professionals who are, within the workspace. And ours is really a jumbled up ball of young, old, all colors, all diversity across the board. And I say, if I was going to have a party, that's who I would want to invite. Not all people like me, but that's why we have such a great mix, right? Right, Z? I think that's part of it too, is that we do have a big mix. But I appreciate that because, I think trying, and I know that we're going to adapt the making sure that we're including all of the celebrations, which we're doing most of the time anyway. But this was good for us. I hope that other people have questions, but to thank you for leading us through this and helping us to become a more diverse workspace.
Well, I have something to piggyback on that, Lori. I think you're right. A big focus of ours is making sure we're including all of our members, and we're really focused on our member experience. Z, you had kind of brought up what it looks like to your guests. And I think where we can dive in even more is how are we handling people we interact with our members so much and we get to know them. We know your name, you come in, it's a relationship. How are we interacting with people when we don't know them across the board in this inclusion? And I think that's a good training opportunity for our team. I'm just curious, do you have any best practices or suggestions on just having open conversations about interacting with people that are different than you all?
Rebecca, I'll let you go first.
That's a gigantic question, and
I know. Just make it small.
The first thing that I would say is, open conversation depends on trust. It depends on grace, and it depends on my ability to tell you that you're making assumptions about me, and that you are, that something's just not right. I need you to be able to be open to hearing that feedback, and not me being able to say that feedback and you not taking it as an attack, but me being able to say, hey, you said blah, blah, blah. And that really, ouch, or that rubbed me the wrong way. So starting even that small then creates a climate where people can talk to each other. And if there are, that issues will bubble up, long before they become like gigantic, they're addressed in a conversation.
Mhm. And consistency. So that's the other part that I think is a really important aspect. And this kind of gets to the, you had two employees that start at the same time and they had different experiences. Same thing in regards to consistency. So let's say you had two individuals that got off the elevator at the same time to be able to go and meet some different people at the office.
Sure.
One person's greeted warmly, the other person is not. So then the question is why was I not greeted the same way as everybody else? So if you can have that consistency and ensure that whether there's a script that people have to have, and I know that feels horrible because it's like so inhumane, but the people can come up with creative scripts that work for them, that still allows for them to be able to use their personality and stuff, but then make sure that there's a consistency in regards to how it is that people are greeted. Another random example that people probably don't necessarily think of is, so let's say you pick up the phone and they call, Will for somebody that's trying to meet up with them, and then Will's like, oh, well, can you have, and the person says to Will, oh yeah, I'll have him wait for you. Now that's a very standard thing that we might say just because the person may present as male, but maybe that isn't how they present. So I can have, so even in making sure something is really small and and maybe seem insignificant to you in regards to that, to say, I'll have them wait for you. What's wrong with saying have them wait for you? Sure. And that could be a situation where then you're not accidentally misgendering somebody and then giving off a different vibe than what it is you want to give off for office centers. And that's an example of something that probably nobody thought of before this moment. It kind of came to my mind in regards to that. But those are like the small things that can make all the difference.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. The other thing is I know that because I've always believed in a diverse workplace and things like that, that some of our One Community partners have been people from all different walks of life. And we've reached out and looked at local charities. We've looked at local organizations. We've looked at things, different ways of putting our funding and our work towards, boosting the community. And I think that those are things that we've done for years and years. And so a lot of people don't know about those programs that we have. So to make our One Community partners aware that we're here to provide help where help is needed. And we have people in the out in the community that are sometimes referring people to the Workspace, and they may get a scholarship or something like that from some of our community people who we're partnering with, specifically like the Girls in Action groups and some of the other, some of the other groups that we have, Jesus in the Cities, and whatever else we're working with. So,
yep, we have to.
We just got to keep reaching out. Keep reaching out.
You have to. You can't look in the usual suspect, easy places to be able to get recruits, whether it be for new employees, whether it be new clients. You have to take that extra step and venture out. And I know Amy, is looking out in all the different places as well. You need to be where the people are, right? And so whether it's the the Black, I know that there's a big Black job fair that happens here, whether it's the LGBT one that puts on by Mosier and Quorum. I think you guys are working with them in regard to that. Whether it's, going into finding where there's a job fair within the Hmong community, it's branching out from that perspective and making sure that your presence is seen and known, because, the only other way that folks are going to hear about you if you aren't already part of those communities is through members. And if your membership isn't as diverse to be able to have a bunch of folks that represent that, then, there's some missed opportunities there.
Rebecca and Z, thank you so much for everything that you've seen today. I mean, it's been, I have so many notes. And one of the things that I'm going to make sure that we do for September is to really bring forth that code of conduct. And even though we have it in our handbooks, to get it to a more concise message that we can post in all of our spaces. Because there have been times when we have asked members to leave that have been inappropriate. And like I said, it's in the course of their handbook, and I think it's paragraphs long. We're going to make sure that we get that out.
Point one.
It needs to just be a paragraph. We need to be nice to one another. There you go. And if you're not, no longer can be a member here. Every member is created equally. And, we used to say that too from the beginning. We had the people who took full-time space, and then we would have people who came in and worked in the virtual offices. And people were like, who are all these new people? There are members. Well, they don't pay the same amount as the people who are, with us, division amongst who's our full-time clients, what people spend on the bottom line. And I always think that there could be somebody who's going to go to new heights and be our biggest clients, and they may start with just a trickle in them.
Yep.
So I mean, we don't know where anyone's going to go and what anything is going to do. And so it's one of those things that I think you've taught me a lot today. Thank you so much. And by listening, and I feel better than I did a couple weeks ago when I was asking you, and I got some nasty letters because, a nasty letter, I should say. And, I'm going to go and talk to that person about where our heart is and what our mission is, and where our company, what the company culture is all about, because we are here to create that culture for everyone. So thank you so much.
Thank you
A
for
lot of
having us.
here have been members of my team. I noticed someone from my friend Angela's team and a couple of other people, and Amy, and you know what, we can do it together. I know we can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
create good
you.
workspaces. Rebecca, I look forward to having a cup of coffee with you one
I
day.
totally agree. Yes,
Yes.
I totally agree. I will.
Sounds good. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and he's, she's, theys, and thems all.
Thank you very
Yay.
much.
That
Thank
we're
you.
inclusive. Yes, thank you so much.
Of course. Have a good day,
You learned a
everyone.
lot. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.